San Francisco, two designers, big ideas, no money. The rent is too high, the credit cards are maxed out, and failure isn't theoretical. It's personal. Not someday, now. This month, this apartment. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia aren't tech founders. They're designers, creative, idealistic, and quietly panicking. They moved to San Francisco because that's where ideas are supposed to happen. But the city doesn't care about ideas. It cares about rent. San Francisco isn't becoming expensive. It already is. Every month feels like a test they're about to fail. Not a test of talent, but a test of endurance. They're doing everything right on paper, working hard, building things, believing, and still the math doesn't work. Then something small happens. A design conference comes to town. Thousands of people flood into the city. Hotels fill up instantly. Prices explode overnight. The city sends a clear message. There's no room for you. So they improvise. They buy a few air mattresses. They put them on the floor of their apartment. They promise breakfast. They throw together a simple website in a weekend. Not because they believe in a grand vision, but because they're out of options. No pitch deck, no market research, no startup language. Just a question that feels almost embarrassingly naive. What if strangers could trust each other? This isn't a startup idea, it's a survival move. They're not trying to change travel, they're trying to pay rent. They're betting that people might be kinder, more open, more human than the systems around them. And something unexpected happens. People show up. They don't just sleep there. They talk. They share meals. They exchange stories. They trust. Guests feel welcomed, not processed. Hosts feel useful, not invisible. Suddenly, this doesn't feel like a hack. It feels like a small rebellion. Against hotels that treat you like a room number. Against cities that only work if you're already winning. Against the assumption that strangers are a threat by default. They call it air bed and breakfast. What they built isn't really technology yet, it's a feeling the internet once promised, human connection instead of distance. For a brief moment, it's pure. People open their homes, guests feel like locals. Money changes hands, but trust is the real currency. And that's the dangerous part, because once you prove that trust can scale, everything else starts scaling with it. At first, growth feels innocent, almost wholesome. More hosts sign up, more guests book stays, more cities light up on the map. Airbeds turn into couches, couches turn into spare rooms. Spare rooms quietly become entire apartments. Airbnb keeps telling the same story. Share what you already have. And for a while, that story still holds. Students cover rent, artists stay afloat, families make ends meet. The platform feels like an equalizer, a way to survive expensive cities, not exploit them. But incentives don't care about origin stories, because once trust works reliably, once strangers show up and pay on time, a different kind of host appears. Not someone sharing a home, someone optimizing an asset. One apartment becomes two, two become five, five become a portfolio. Hosting turns into operations. Hospitality turns into yield. Hosts stop asking, "Can I rent out my place?" They start asking, "How do I maximize occupancy?" Airbnb doesn't push this shift. It doesn't need to. The platform rewards availability. Reviews reward consistency. Algorithms reward scale. What started as hospitality quietly becomes infrastructure. Cities feel it before anyone names it. Rents creep upward. Long-term tenants disappear. Neighborhoods change character. Not slowly, seasonally. Suitcases replace strollers. Key boxes multiply. Locals don't leave because they want to. They leave because they can't compete with nightly rates calculated by software. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Airbnb didn't invent real estate speculation. It democratized it. It took something that once required capital, lawyers, and patience, and turned it into an app with notifications. The founders didn't plan this. They weren't chasing housing markets, they were chasing growth. But scale doesn't ask for permission. Governments scramble. Laws written for hotels don't fit living rooms. City councils argue. Residents protest. Headlines shift. Airbnb responds the only way it can. We're just connecting people. Which is true, and also incomplete. Because when enough connections point in the same direction, they stop being neutral. They become force. Barcelona limits listings. New York cracks down. Amsterdam caps nights. Airbnb negotiates, adapts, resists, complies. Sometimes all at once. Public opinion fractures. To guests, Airbnb is freedom. To hosts, it's opportunity. To cities, it's disruption. To neighbors, it's noise, and suitcases rolling past at midnight. The same system that once felt intimate now feels extractive. And somewhere between spare rooms and spreadsheets, Airbnb crosses an invisible line. Not into villainy, into adulthood. By the time Airbnb goes public, the rebellion is over. Not because it failed, but because it won. The company that once asked strangers to trust each other now has to convince regulators, investors, and cities that it deserves to exist. The language changes. Sharing becomes hosting. Community becomes policy. Belonging stays, mostly in the branding. Behind the scenes, Airbnb grows up fast. Legal teams expand. City-by-city negotiations replace weekend hacks. Rules are no longer something to outrun, they're something to shape. Then the pandemic hits. Travel collapses overnight. Airbnb lays off roughly a quarter of its workforce. The tone shifts visibly. Optimism gives way to realism. The survival instinct returns, but this time, it's corporate. Focus narrows, costs are cut, the mission is simplified. Airbnb stops trying to be everything. It doubles down on being a marketplace, not a movement. Today, Airbnb sells flexibility, remote work, longer stays, living anywhere, not just visiting. The product is smoother, the brand is calmer, the edges are gone. And yet, the contradiction remains. Airbnb still runs on trust. But that trust is now mediated by algorithms, policies, and enforcement teams. It still promises belonging, but belonging now has terms and conditions. So what do we do with a story like this? Airbnb didn't betray its original idea. It outgrew it. The rebel utopia worked, and that's exactly why it couldn't stay small. This isn't a story about good founders turning bad. It's a story about what happens when human-scale ideas collide with global systems. The founders wanted to pay rent. They ended up reshaping cities. That's not failure, that's consequence. Some companies start by challenging the system. Others never challenge it at all. Next episode, we look at the opposite kind of power, a brand that didn't disrupt its industry, but slowly became part of everyday life itself. Coca-Cola. And that episode exists because a viewer asked for it. So, shout out to MJ's Beauty Cupboard for planting the seed. From rebel utopias to global icons. This is the Founder Files. Now I want to hear from you. Which founder, company, or rise and fall story should we cover next? Drop your ideas in the comments, and it might just become the next episode of The Founder Files.